She wanted me to embarrass myself in front of the entire audience. As soon as I noticed her mistake in the equation, she started picking on me, as if I were just a black guy who didn't belong there. But when I solved the problem that the graduate students couldn't, everyone fell silent. Then I realized that the struggle was not only for knowledge, it was a struggle for respect. I entered the classroom as usual quietly, without disturbing anyone. The large hall at the University of Chicago was already filling up with students. Everyone was rushing around, opening their laptops, taking out their notebooks. It was Monday. Time for difficult math problems. Professor Brooks was always strict, a sharp gaze, words without embellishment. She knew how to keep everyone on their toes, and not everyone could handle her methods. I sat in the second row, hands on my knees, listening to music on my headphones. It helped me concentrate. I didn't want to stand out. My skin color here was like a sign of separateness, a silent reminder that I was always a little out of the game. When the professor entered, the audience fell silent instantly. Her gaze swept across the room, and then stopped on me, cold, slightly skeptical. I felt her attention tighten my throat. "Good morning," she said, not hiding her slight mockery. "Today we're going to look at lambda operators. Not for the faint of heart." She began writing complex formulas on the board, presenting the material without any leniency. For me, math is more than just numbers. It's the language I speak. During the lecture, I noticed a mistake in her solution. It was small, but fatal. The girl in the front row was the first to raise her hand and point out the mistake. The professor barely shrugged and waved her hand. I saw the girl blush and lower her head. I couldn't stay silent. I raised my hand and said calmly, "Excuse me, Professor, in the second step, you applied the transformation incorrectly. This changes the limits of the integral." The room fell silent. Everyone looked at me. The professor paused for a second, her lips pressed together. "Oh, really?" she said coldly. "Then explain it, Mr. Johnson." I stood up, feeling neither fear nor doubt. I didn't hesitate for a second. I pointed to the board, explaining the logic and showing where she had made the mistake. My voice was calm and confident. The first whispers began to echo through the hall. The professor was silent, her face showing no emotion, but I could see that she was boiling inside. She immediately said, "Show me how to do it correctly." I took the chalk and corrected the equation. My handwriting was simple, but the solution was perfect. The professor nodded briefly and said, "Good, Mr. Johnson. Here's your next assignment." She wrote a complex equation on the board, a task for graduate students. She wanted to break me, to make me look like a fool. But I didn't back down. I took the chalk and began to write. Each step was clear and logical. The room fell silent. Everyone was looking at me. The professor smiled condescendingly at first, then her face froze. She fell silent. I finished the task faster than expected, underlined the correct answer, and returned to my seat. Silence reigned in the room. For the first time that semester, someone had challenged her authority and won. But that was only the beginning. She began to look for new ways to break me, to put me in difficult situations where I had to prove that I was worthy of being there. I could feel her attitude shifting from contempt to anxiety. She was afraid that I would break her control. But I couldn't back down anymore. It wasn't just a fight for knowledge. It was a fight for respect, for the right to be here not as the other, but as an equal. After that day, everything changed. Every glance in the university corridors was filled with even more attention, and not always good. I felt my classmates start to react differently to me. Some greeted me quietly with respect. Others looked at me as if I were some kind of threat. But the most tension was between me and Professor Brooks. She no longer hid her hostility. In lectures, her tone became harsher, and her assignments more difficult and unexpected. It was as if she wanted to break me, not just as a student, but as a person who dared to challenge her. Everyone noticed, even those who had previously ignored my presence. One morning, before the lecture began, I caught her eye cold, watchful, full of distrust. She stopped next to me and said quietly, almost in a whisper, "Mr. Johnson, you mustn't think this is just a game. This is the real world. There's no room for mistakes here, especially for you." I felt the words hit me hard in the chest. Why especially for you? Why did my background become a measure of my worth? But I didn't respond. I felt bitter, but I remained calm. That same day, she made an unexpected announcement. "Johnson, get ready for a special assignment. It's for those who want to prove they deserve more." All eyes were on me again, but I agreed without hesitation. This assignment was a test that no one had ever heard of before, a complex theorem that no undergraduate could solve without help. She called in graduate students and seniors, but never offered it to regular students. The weeks of preparation turned into a battle against time and doubt. I felt pressure from all sides, from the professor, my classmates, and sometimes even my own fear that I might not be able to do it. Every evening in the library turned into a marathon of formulas and detailed analysis. And then the day of the exam arrived. The hall was filled with the best students, graduate students, and teachers. The professor sat in the front row, her gaze cold but attentive. When they started handing out the assignments, I felt my heart start to beat faster. But now fear gave way to determination. I didn't just want to prove that I could do it. I wanted to show that I deserved respect. The first few minutes were critical. The assignment was difficult, and every step required attention. I noticed that some of my competitors were starting to get nervous, but I took a deep breath and focused. When I began to explain my solution, I heard quiet whispers. Some students exchanged surprised glances. Others looked on with admiration. The professor, on the other hand, pressed her lips together as if struggling with her own emotions. Halfway through, I noticed that one of the graduate students was starting to get nervous. I didn't feel any rivalry. I felt calm. It was more than a game. It was the revelation of the real truth. When the last step was taken, I felt the room fall silent. The professor slowly stood up, looked at me with unexpected respect, but her voice remained cold. "Well done, Mr. Johnson. You have proven that you deserve this. But remember, this is only the beginning." I realized that this victory was not just mine. It was a victory for everyone who had ever felt inferior because of the color of their skin or their background. It was a challenge to a system that wanted to break me. After the exam, several students approached me and quietly offered words of support. I felt that I was not alone in this fight. Professor Brooks returned to the lectern and continued her lecture, but now there was something new in her voice: respect, albeit veiled by coldness. I knew there would be many more battles ahead, but now I was not alone. And I wouldn't give up. Ever since I proved I could do it, something changed in the air. But it wasn't what I expected. Not everyone celebrated my victory, especially Professor Brooks. She no longer hid behind her cold demeanor. Now she was openly trying to break me in a different way. Once, during a consultation, she suddenly asked me a question that was meant to cast doubt on my knowledge. But her words sounded different, like a test of endurance. "Johnson, are you sure you can handle the workload next semester?" she asked in a cold voice, but there was a certain threat in her eyes. I smiled, but inside I was gathering all my willpower. "Yes, Professor. I'm ready." Her response was a barely perceptible smile, not a friendly one, but more of a challenge. After that conversation, I felt the tension building. Strange things started happening. Some of my notes disappeared, I was ignored in group projects, and my grades were inexplicably lowered. I tried not to pay attention, but it became clear that this was no coincidence. At the university, where I should have felt supported, I became a target for those who didn't want to see me succeed. One evening, while sitting in the library, I overheard two students talking about me. They were discussing my victory, but their words sounded dismissive and full of stereotypes. "He just got lucky," said one. "That guy's not one of us." I realized that this struggle was not just for me. It was for everyone who, like me, was trying to break through the barriers of prejudice and stereotypes. At the next lecture, the professor unexpectedly announced a competition that would take place in a month, a regional math Olympiad, which she had decided to send me to. "If you're really that talented," she said, "prove it there." I knew it would be a new challenge, but now I was ready, not just for the sake of winning, but to show everyone that everyone has a place in the world of science, regardless of the color of their skin. I began to prepare, immersing myself in complex problems and working harder than ever before. Support from my classmates began to grow, but so did the hatred of those who couldn't accept my success. Every day was a battle, with the outside world and with my inner doubts. And then the thing I feared most happened. While I was preparing, I received an anonymous message: "Back off, or we'll make your life hell." That was the moment when the struggle ceased to be just an academic challenge. It became personal. I couldn't be afraid, because if I backed down, I would be betraying not only myself, but also all those who were fighting against the walls of injustice. The next morning, I went up to my professor and said, I'm ready. As long as you want to test me, I won't give up." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded quietly. "All right, Johnson. Show them all who you are." I felt a fire burning in my chest, not just the fire of struggle, but also the fire of hope. The days leading up to the Olympics flew by in a flash. I worked tirelessly, but the pressure didn't let up. On the contrary, it became more intense. Professor Brooks made no secret of the fact that she was watching my every move. She asked the most difficult questions, checked every little detail, and tried to break my concentration. Once, she unexpectedly asked me to stay after class for a private conversation. I thought it was another challenge, but she spoke differently. "You are truly talented," she said quietly. "But this world is cruel, and not everyone is ready to accept you. You must be careful." I felt her words pulling me back into the shadows of doubt. But that wasn't my path. "I'm not going to give up," I replied firmly. After our conversation, I felt a kind of vague respect develop between us. She was still strict, but now she was no longer just an enemy, but a challenge that forced me to grow. The Olympiad began with a frenzy of energy. The hall was filled with the best students from all over the country. Among them were graduate students, future scientists, and me, a freshman who had come here to prove that I belonged in this world. The first round was about logic and speed. I solved the problems one after another, feeling how each correct step added to my confidence. The audience and judges watched closely. The second round was theoretical proofs, which required not only knowledge but also endurance. My fingers flew across the paper, my brain squeezed out every possible option. Time seemed to shrink, but I remained cool-headed. The third round, the last and hardest, brought everything together. Here, it was necessary to demonstrate not only intelligence but also character. Behind me sat those who doubted me, those who didn't believe in me. Behind my back, I heard the voices of doubt and those who wanted me to fail. And suddenly, in the middle of the last task, I felt my heart beating faster and my hands shaking with tension. It seemed as if the whole world had stopped, leaving me alone with the equations exploding in my head. And then I remembered I wasn't the only one fighting here. Everyone who had been broken was fighting. Everyone who had faced injustice, who had sought justice. I took a deep breath and got to work. Step by step, symbol by symbol, I moved toward my goal. When time ran out, I felt relief and pride at the same time. It was more than just a victory, it was a struggle that had lasted for years. After the results were announced, the hall erupted in applause. My name was called first. Professor Brooks sat in the front row, her face filled with unexpected, yet restrained pride. I approached her after the ceremony. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You've changed everything I thought about you. You're not just a student. You're an example." I felt that those words meant more than all the grades in the world. After the competition, life didn't get any easier, but everything changed. My name was now known not only at the university but also beyond its walls. But most importantly, I finally felt that I had earned the respect not only of my fellow students but also of my teachers. Professor Brooks was no longer just a hostile figure to me. She became a challenge that helped me understand that the fight for justice is not only about external circumstances, but also about inner strength. One morning during a lecture, she suddenly addressed me loudly and clearly. "Mr. Johnson, I want to officially recognize your achievements. You have proven that talent and perseverance can overcome any barrier." The room filled with applause. I felt that everyone's eyes were now focused not on my differences, but on my abilities. After the lecture, students of different nationalities approached me, congratulating me and thanking me for showing them that it doesn't matter where you come from. What matters is where you are going. But what struck me most was a letter I received from one student, a girl who was afraid to speak in class because she thought she didn't fit in. She wrote that I had inspired her to fight for her rights and her voice. I realized that my struggle was bigger than me. It was part of a movement that was changing the university, society, and the world. Professor Brooks eventually changed her approach. She began to support students, especially those who faced prejudice. It wasn't easy, but her changes showed that even the system can be transformed. I realized one simple truth: justice prevails when we are not afraid to stand up for the truth and for ourselves. My victory is not only my triumph, but the victory of everyone who faces the walls of inequality. A story that began with a fight against injustice ended with a new beginning for me, for my professor, for everyone who wants change.